Picture this. It's the winter of 1866, way out on the American frontier. An entire U.S. Army command just vanishes into the wilderness. When they're finally found, the scene is so shocking it just stuns the nation. This is the story of a perfect ambush, a huge clash of cultures, and a controversy that, people still argue about today. Okay, let's get right into it.
So here's the central question, right? How in the world did a decorated Civil War officer lead 80 of his men into a trap so flawless that not a single one of them made it out alive? To really get what happened, we need to rewind and look at the source of the whole conflict.
And it all starts with a simple line on a map, a trail that sliced right through the heart of Native American territory. It basically created a collision course between two completely different worlds.
Yeah, take a look at the path of that yellow line. The Bozeman Trail? It was supposed to be a shortcut to the gold fields in Montana. The problem was, it cut directly through the last great hunting grounds of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. So in 1866, the U.S. Army gets sent in to protect travelers on this trail, and they start building this string of forts deep in what was, let's be clear, hostile territory.
The real flashpoint was Fort Phil Kearny. It was brand new, totally isolated, and basically under siege from the second they started building it. I mean, in just a few months, the soldiers there had already dealt with over 50 separate attacks and had lost more than 20 men. This place wasn't really a fort. It was more like a powder keg, just sitting there, waiting for a spark.
And that spark, well, it was going to come from the clash of two very, very different leaders inside that fort. These were two personalities that were absolutely on a collision course with destiny. So on one side, you've got Colonel Henry Carrington. He's the fort's commander, but he's an engineer, not some frontline combat vet. He totally understood how dangerous his position was, so he went with a cautious, defensive strategy. He just refused to be baited into a big fight. But his junior officers? They didn't see that as being smart. They saw it as cowardice.
And that brings us to Captain William Fetterman. This guy was a decorated Civil War hero, and he shows up at the fort just brimming with confidence. He had zero experience fighting Native Americans and was super open about criticizing Carrington's caution. This quote here, supposedly his boast, "Give me 80 men and I can ride through the whole Sioux nation?" I mean, that just perfectly captures how little he respected his enemy.
Fetterman actually got a harsh dose of reality just a few weeks before the big disaster. On December 6th, he led a relief party that was almost lured into a very similar ambush. They took casualties, and it was a serious wake-up call. The fort's legendary guide, the mountain man Jim Bridger, he put it bluntly, "These soldiers don't know anything about fighting Indians."
So while all that tension was building up inside the fort, outside, Red Cloud and a whole coalition of warriors were putting together a brilliant and incredibly deadly plan. Let's switch over to their strategy and see how this thing was built.
The drive behind this plan really came from leaders like the Oglala Lakota chief, Red Cloud. His words were powerful, and they rallied the tribes. For them, this wasn't just about land, it was about defending their entire way of life, their sacred home, from what they saw as an invasion.
And this just lays out their plan perfectly. It was a classic military strategy, and it was executed with absolute perfection. First, create a distraction. Attack the fort's woodcutting party. Second, send a small group of decoys, including, by the way, a young warrior named Crazy Horse, to bait the soldiers who were sure to come out. Third, lead those soldiers over a specific ridge where they'd be out of sight from the fort. And then finally, step 4. Spring the trap with over 1,000 warriors hidden on all sides. And you have to understand, adding to their determination was this really powerful spiritual element. There was a vision, a prophecy that foretold a huge victory against the soldiers. It actually gave the coming fight its Lakota name, the Battle of the 100 in the Hands. It gave them the sense that victory was preordained, that destiny was on their side.
And now we come to the day itself. It was a clear, cold morning where all these pieces, the arrogance, the caution, the strategy, the prophecy, they were all about to come together in one catastrophic chain of events. The timeline here, it really tells the whole story. The attack on the wood train happens like clockwork. Fetterman, who claims he's the senior officer, demands and gets command of the relief party. Carrington, who's clearly worried about Fetterman's impulsive nature, gives him a direct, crystal-clear order. And he repeats it for emphasis. Do not, under any circumstances, pursue the enemy over Lodge Trail Ridge. But, within minutes, Fetterman disobeys that order. He and his 80 men vanish over that ridge chasing the decoys. And then at noon, the men back at the fort hear this huge volley of gunfire that just doesn't stop.
This is the moment the trap was sprung. As Fetterman's men came down into the valley, the decoys gave the signal. Over 1,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors rose up from their hiding places, just swarming the soldiers from every direction. The fight was brutal. It was hand-to-hand, and it was terrifyingly short.
81. That's how many men rode out of Fort Phil Kearny that morning. It was a mix of infantry and cavalry, plus 2 civilians who had grabbed guns to join the fight.
And this is the number that just floored the country. 0. In less than an hour, the entire command was wiped out. Not a single survivor. It was the U.S. Army's worst defeat on the Great Plains up to that point. It's a lesson that, tragically, they would fail to learn just 10 years later at a little place called the Little Bighorn.
So the battle was over, but the fallout,
That was just getting started. It left behind a gruesome scene, a national scandal, and a debate over who to blame that, believe it or not, still goes on.
A relief party from the fort found the bodies later that day, and in a totally desperate move, a civilian named John Portuguese Phillips volunteered to ride 236 miles through a blizzard to get to Fort Laramie for help. He actually made it, stumbling in exhausted during a Christmas ball, but it was too late. The news spread, the nation was stunned, and Colonel Carrington, he was immediately relieved of his command, becoming the main scapegoat for the whole disaster.
And this right here is the heart of the whole controversy. See, Carrington spent the rest of his life arguing that he gave clear orders and that an arrogant, insubordinate Fetterman disobeyed them. But others argue that Fetterman was a professional soldier who might have just been trying to execute a flawed plan to attack the warriors from the rear, a plan that maybe Carrington himself even approved. The thing is, since Fetterman and all of his men were killed, we only have Carrington's side of the story.
But look, regardless of who was to blame, the outcome was undeniable. The Fetterman Fight was a stunning, total victory for Red Cloud's coalition. It so demoralized the U.S. government that 2 years later, they signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. They abandoned the forts, completely pulled off from the trail, and gave in to every single demand.
So we're left with this question. Do we look at this as a story of one man's ego leading 80 others to their deaths? Or was this disaster just the inevitable, bloody result of when one nation's manifest destiny runs headlong into another's desperate fight for survival on their own sacred land? That's definitely something worth thinking about.